Good evening, and thank you for joining Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan's virtual telephone town hall. My name is Mike Anderson, and I'll be tonight's moderator. In just a few moments, we'll turn it over to Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan for some brief opening remarks before opening the call for questions. Importantly, if you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press *3 at any time, and you'll be connected with an operator. Again, if you'd like the opportunity to ask a question this evening, please press *3 to enter the queue. With that, we'll turn the call over to Senator Murkowski. Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to all Alaskans who have dialed in tonight to be with myself and Senator Sullivan. This is our second tele-town hall. The first one was very successful, and this opportunity for us to hear from you is very, very, very important. So I'm going to keep my remarks very brief so that we can turn to your questions. Just to give you kind of a recap, it was just 5 weeks ago, March 5th, that we passed an emergency supplemental funding package to really strengthen up the healthcare response to the coronavirus outbreak. It was just a week or so after that, we passed a bill called the Families First Coronavirus Response. This was designed to not only mitigate the health impacts, ensuring that testing is free to Americans, making sure that paid sick leave as well as family and medical leave is provided for, enhanced unemployment insurance, and then nutrition assistance. That was in that second phase, if you will. So the third phase is where we are now, and it's referred to as the CARES Act. This I have been describing as an economic an economic stabilization package. This is not recovery. This is getting us stable, getting our health care stable, getting our health outcomes where we need them to be on the curve, but also stabilization, providing immediate relief to individuals through direct financial assistance and unemployment benefits for states and schools and colleges, loan deferment for federal student loan borrowers, assistance to small businesses and nonprofits, an effort to help stabilize key industries, and again, to do more to boost the healthcare response. There's been a lot of developments on direct assistance. We were informed today by the Secretary of the Treasury that they intend to start moving those out by the end of next week. Those who have filed their taxes electronically will see that coming to them first. The unemployment insurance expansion is a very significant program for those who have lost their jobs. So many Alaskans. We've had over 36,000 Alaskans that have filed for unemployment insurance to this point in time, which is absolutely unprecedented. I read it was roughly 14 times what we would normally see during this time of year. I think it is important to recognize that we have expanded these benefits to not only include an additional $600 per week, but also we've expanded those who are eligible. So those who were self-employed, independent contractors, gig workers will be eligible for this assistance. It's going to take a little bit longer for the state system to be built up to allow for that, but know that is in the works. A great deal of discussion about when we will see testing. I think we recognize that as important as it is to get back to work, to get the economy back on its feet, we have to make sure that people are going to be safe. And so the real opportunity to demonstrate that will come through the ability to have available multiple rounds of testing. And so we are working to address those aspects as we've been meeting with regulators, or not meeting, but in our telephone conversations and conferences that we've been having electronically. There is, I think it's very, very clear that as we are implementing this massive legislative effort, and keep in mind, it's just been a little over 2 weeks ago that this CARES Act was signed into law. And so we have experienced issues and problems. I know we're going to hear from lots of folks with frustration about the Paycheck protection program. This is the small business loan program administered through the SBA and helped facilitate by our lenders. It's a challenge, but I think we need to understand that when we're trying to roll out something as quickly as we have, getting our financial institutions geared up, we heard that at this point in time, in 2 weeks' time, the Alaska banks had seen more loans signed off on than in an average year. So, I mean, the need is unprecedented. We're trying to be as responsive as we can, but we know that there are gaps. We know we have undershot in certain areas. We're seeing that with the Paycheck Protection, that small business loan program, where we know we haven't anticipated the need appropriately and we need to put more resources in. We attempted to do that today. We're going to continue with that. But we need to know from Alaskans the concerns that you are having, the fears that you have shared, what it is that we can do to be more responsive. So that's the reason for our call with you this evening. And just thank you. Thank you for what you are doing as Alaskans to pull together. I think we recognize that all of the funding, all of the efforts that we'll put in place, all of the programs, these are going to be necessary. These are going to be important. But at the end of the day, the medical experts can tell you that the one thing we know is that if we limit our contact, if we keep our distance, if we follow the protocols, as difficult as they are, to not travel, to really limit our interactions, that this is how we will get on the other side of this pandemic. This will be how we are able to get on the other side of the economic devastation that we're seeing in our state right now and getting Alaskans safely back to work. With that, I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Senator Sullivan, who's been doing a great job. He's a good partner on this effort.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski, and good evening, Alaska. And I just want to first also thank all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us here tonight. What Senator Murkowski and I and Congressman Young have been trying to do is be as transparent, get as much information out to as many of our fellow Alaskans as possible during these unprecedented times. I also do want to mention that it is Holy Week, Passover, Good Friday tomorrow, Easter Sunday, so our prayers go out to all of you, particularly those who have caught this virus and the families of those who have lost family members already. We're all working together. A lot of self-sacrifice is happening throughout our state. Everybody has a role to play. Everybody is playing a role. I really want to do a shout out. You know, we talk about teleworking and, working over the phones, as many thousands, millions of Alaskans and Americans are doing. But there's also people who run our state, the truck drivers, the miners, first responders, grocery store workers, healthcare professionals on the front lines who can't telework, and I do a special thanks to all of them. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, we're working closely with the governor, Dr. Zink, their whole team, other Alaska elected leaders, and the federal administration, the Trump administration, and as a matter of fact, we had a call earlier today with the Vice President, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, the Secretary of the Treasury, the FDA administrator. Senator Murkowski and I had the opportunity to raise a couple issues related to Alaska. I just wanted to mention a couple highlights from that briefing because I think they're important. First, echoing what Senator Murkowski had said, the Vice President, Dr. Fauci, when asked, and many senators on this call asked, what is the most important thing so we can open up our society and economy again? They both emphasized the social distancing, the discipline to do it, everybody sacrificing now, will hasten that day when we're reopening our economy and our society getting back to work soon. I think that's an important message, an important one that bears repeating. The good news I thought from this briefing, we're not there yet, but it was the first time in one of these briefings where I heard from Dr. Birx and the FDA administrator just how they think we're going to be able to ramp up this testing on a pretty rapid scale here in the next few weeks. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, as most people recognize, that is going to be the key for our workers, for our healthcare facilities, whether in big cities like Anchorage or out in the rural communities, and to be able to get our economy moving again, our society moving again, and make sure people are healthy. But they were talking about the diagnostic tests. That's the Abbott lab tests, that many more are coming online. Alaska actually has quite a number of these already, but they're talking about within the next 4 weeks, maybe as many as being able to produce 2 million of these a week. The antibody tests, which is even more exciting in terms of what that can do. The FDA administrator was looking, again, a little bit further down the short-term, medium-term, long-term, but was talking about millions and millions of these. That'll be critical. We will be working on getting as many of these resources to our state as possible. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, the checks, direct deposit, will be hopefully coming by the end of next week. That's what the Secretary of the Treasury just briefed us on. And then I can tell you in that briefing, the Secretary, the Vice President, Dr. Birx, some of the other senior officials in the federal government were mentioning how they were focused on Alaska. That's part of our job to make sure they hear from all of you. Speaking of hearing from all of us, the President did approve Governor Dunleavy's disaster declaration. That was approved today. That's important because that will enable our state to take a number of actions that will be fully reimbursed by the federal government. So that was an important development today. And then finally, I just want to mention what Senator Murkowski mentioned. We put the CARES Act legislation together, resources to small businesses, to unemployed workers, to families, working families. We are now in the implementation phase, and of course, there are snafus, there are delays, there are bureaucratic decisions that are not being able to get this information, these resources, out to our fellow Alaskans. We need to hear from you. I'm sure we're going to hear from you on these issues. And then, as I've mentioned in pretty much all of these teletown halls, make sure you use us. We have great staff. They're working 24/7 around the clock to try to help as many Alaskans as possible. As these programs get smoothed out, we're hopeful that they're going to work a lot better, but when you have a bill this large with the entire country focused on it, not just our state, there are going to be snafus. We will work with you round the clock to make sure the resources that are intended for our state and our country to get through this unprecedented period do that. So without any further comments, I look forward to your questions and getting back to you as soon as possible. For those who won't be able to ask questions tonight, if you have them, we'll take those and we'll be able to respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. And before I open up to questions, I just want to remind everyone again, any listener that would like to ask a question, please press *3 at any time to be placed into the queue. Again, that's *3. And first up, we're going to go to Jim Sidney in Juneau, who has a question for the senator.
Yeah, hi. I'm here in Juneau. Last December, me and my son and my wife, we bought out our partners on a gravel pit here in Juneau, and I went and got myself in quite a bit of payments per month. That with the tourist industry and the construction industry stopping, all my payments are coming due. And I tried to do I believe it's the Paycheck paperwork to get it started, and I just come up to a roadblock because we're self-employed and we don't have a payroll per se, and we don't qualify for anything. And I was hoping, I thought it was supposed to come into effect hear either today or tomorrow that these rules are going to be changed. And the second question I had was, how do I stop all these creditors calling every hour and sending emails and threatening lawsuits? With all this national emergency, doesn't that stop?
Well, Jim, you are expressing a concern that has been shared by many Alaskans that we have heard from, and I think I mentioned in my comments that what we have done at the federal level with this expansion of unemployment insurance compensation, we've expanded these eligible categories. So this goes above what the state has done in many cases. So what is happening is, for those of you who are self-employed, sole proprietors, independent contractors, you will be able to apply beginning tomorrow, the 10th of April. So the rollout on Friday, many people were able to take advantage of that, but I know, because we've been hearing from them, that people such as yourself who said, wait, they told me I wasn't eligible. You will be eligible based on just what you've shared with us in terms of your operation. You should be eligible, and so I would recommend that you make that application tomorrow.
Yep, and Jim, I'll just add on to that. That's correct. The self-employed eligible tomorrow, and you can also apply. Now, again, there's been snafus on this one, but the economic injury disaster loans from the SBA, those you can also apply for. You can request an advance of up to $10,000 from the SBA. They're supposed to distribute that within 3 days, even if you don't get the loan. It is essentially a grant to eligible small businesses. So, but as you can imagine, there's been a flood of applications. We talked to the SBA just yesterday on getting them to streamline this. So I would encourage you to do that as well. And the lenders are supposed to be flexible in determining payroll for self-employed. So if you bring them, what you've been paying yourself or others with regard to your business in the gravel pit arena, they should be flexible in terms of that loan. And remember, if you use the other loan, the Paycheck Protection Loan, 75% of that for your own payroll, that loan after 8 weeks should, under the CARES Act, morph into a grant. So that's 2 opportunities of grants. And again, if you're having difficulty with this, please reach out to one of our offices.
Okay, thank you, Senator. And once again, just for those that might have joined this call late, if you'd like to ask a question of the Senator, please press *3 to be placed into the queue at any time. Again, that's *3 to be placed into the queue and ask a question. Next up, we're going to go to Brenda Adams, who's calling from Homer. You're on the line with the Senators. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm curious what it might be being done to help Alaskans that are stuck outside. They went out for the part of the winter in RVs and can't get back because the Canadian border is closed. Is there any concept or any thought to creating some kind of a direct pass-through, kind of like a visa, like we used to go to cross East Germany, but get these people home that want to get back home? They're all stuck outside.
Well, Brenda, we should be able to get those folks through. It was recognized that given how Alaskans move back and forth from here to the lower 48, if we're in a vehicle, we got to cross through Canada. And so I know we have the limitations on essential business and trying to limit that travel, but we have been working not only the Canadian travel issue, but for all those who are stranded in other countries, the efforts through the State Department to basically bring folks back has been extraordinary. I know initially there was a great deal of frustration from Alaskans. In fact, we had some folks from Homer that were stuck over in Peru, and it was challenging to get the attention of the State Department in a focused way. It took a couple weeks. It was a lot of pressure from constituents. It was a lot of pressure from us as members of the delegation. But we are really making some. They've made considerable gains in getting folks home as quickly as they can. So on the folks that are stuck on the other side in the lower 48 wanting to come back home, I think again that's something. If people are unsure, call our offices either in Alaska or in Washington D.C. Because getting Alaskans back home is what we're trying to help facilitate.
Yeah, and Brenda, I think one thing that's created a bit of a snafu when the Canadians were shutting the border, we worked with them and our own Homeland Security to make sure they knew that Alaskans trying to drive home was considered essential travel. And Canada recognized that. You need some proof of Alaska residency, like a driver's license or a passport. But what happened just last week, the Canadians implemented a mandatory 14-day quarantine for all people entering their country. That's created some friction. It doesn't appear they're strictly enforcing that for Alaskans, but we have heard that that's becoming a problem. So again, we can raise this with the State Department. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, we're having almost daily phone calls with the State Department Repatriation Task Force for Alaskans and their fellow Americans stuck abroad. And by the way, there's tens of thousands still. But let us know. We can reach out both with Homeland Security and the Canadians to make sure our Alaskans are getting home and able to drive through Canada, which hasn't been a problem until recently, and I think this quarantine has been part of the big problem.
All right, thank you, Senators. Next up, we're going to go to David Hayes from Ketchikan. David, do you have a question for the Senators? Oh, looks like we might have lost David there. David, you out there?
Yeah. I recently applied for unemployment and was denied. I'm a commercial fisherman, and they said I hadn't paid into the program and therefore had no money coming. And I remember in a communique from Senator Sullivan that Alaska fishermen are now eligible for this. So I'm confused.
David, let me grab that. We made sure that in that legislation that our fishermen were going to be covered. Now, what's been happening, and like I said, the legislation talks about self-employed, independent contractors, and what's been happening is the federal law, and we've been hearing about this, again, this goes to this issue of the snafus. The federal law expands the eligibility under this new federal program. And the problem is right now what we're seeing is the significant amount of resources that have been put in by the federal government, $250 billion, to plus up this system, is actually going through the state of Alaska unemployment system. So what we're hearing and seeing, and there's actually an article in the ADN just tonight, is the updated system for the state hasn't caught up with the more expanded requirements and eligibility that we put in the federal law. So again, this is one of these issues where we're going to continue to work with all of you. Please reach out to my office in Ketchikan or Senator Murkowski's office in Ketchikan to work with you on this. But we are hearing that this is a concern. Even those with limited work history we included in this unemployment as part of the CARES Act. So we'll continue to press this. I would encourage you to do the same. And if you need direct help from one of our offices, please reach out and we will help you.
David, just to further Senator Sullivan's comments there, it's our understanding that because Alaska's UI system is basically working on an old legacy mainframe IT system, it's just taking longer than they had anticipate. It's my understanding that they have engaged on a new contract. They're working to put this in place, but it's just taking a little bit longer. And it's not unique to Alaska, as Senator Sullivan mentioned. We anticipated on the federal side that with an expansion like this, it was going to cause impacts on the 50 different systems out there, and so there would have to be adaptations made. It's just going to take a few more weeks, as I understand, for Alaska Unemployment Insurance Division to be able to make these adjustments. But you will, because of the expanded definition, fishermen, self-employed, those gig workers that are out there should be covered by this expanded federal UI.
Thanks, Senators. And again, just for those that might have joined us late, if you'd like to ask a question of the Senators, please press *3 and you'll be placed into the queue. Next up, we're going to go to Crystal in Palmer. You're on live with the Senators.
Hi, Senators. First of all, I just want to thank you guys for all the hard work that you guys are doing, and if there's any way that these small business owners can help you guys, I'm very passionate about what small business does for our economy. I've got a couple questions. One is to just bring forward some concerns I'm hearing in our region from local businesses. One is that we want to have a market to go back to. I mean, it's really quite an interesting time when you have so many loans being thrown at you and money thrown at you, but what good is a loan if you don't have a market to go back to, right? We have to have a market to deliver our services so we can pay back these loans. So my question to you, under this National Emergency Act, the emergency declaration for the National Emergencies Act, it was specific and there's no preference for local firms. I think that would have been a perfect time for us to insert some incentivization there to use local manufacturing firms. We've got some local companies here in our area that have turned their small manufacturing facilities into some needed products like the cotton swabs. Are you guys kind of pushing that forward, that, hey, Alaska's open for business? We got some, especially what's happening on the slope, you've got some really good resources right here that could turn these warehouses and manufacturing into supporting the medical community. So that's just wanting to see if you guys are taking advantage of pushing our existing infrastructure here to support the world and to encourage them to use local firms. My second question is insurance premium. For some of us that are self-employed, we've had to go out to U.S., the private sector and pay over $2,000 a month to cover our families. And yet I haven't heard one insurance company talk about how they're going to help us pay our premiums.
So Crystal, on the local manufacturing, I do think we've got some good stories in Alaska out there. In Palmer, you've got Travarius that is, as you point out, helping turn out some PPE, the swabs. That wasn't their business just a month or so ago. And so how Alaskans are stepping up to respond in ways that they can, I think is significant. This has been something that rather than having a government-ordered preference for local manufacturing because the need has just been so dramatic and so quickly. It's really been kind of a call out to all hands on deck to come forward. And the governor through his team, working with Region 10 of FEMA, as they're really trying to help identify where not only potential materials and stockpiles are, but where we can utilize local businesses to help build out that stock. And so at the highest level, the president has called upon his federal authorities, the Defense Procurement Act, to basically order certain manufacturers here in the United States to produce. So instead of General Motors producing carburetors, they're producing ventilators, and so it is at all levels. I think that you are seeing an effort to respond to meet the need. As far as insurance premiums go, I do think it should be noted that Blue Cross Blue Shield indicated several days ago, I don't know, the days are all running into one another, but that they would for those who had been faced with COVID-related expenses, that they would cover the cost of deductibles and co-pays. That doesn't necessarily address your question, but it is a recognition that that the expenses that individuals, even those who are insured, will have to incur if they contract the virus. We need to try to address that to the extent that we can.
And Crystal, I know that you're a great champion of our small businesses, so thank you. And the question is a really good one. You know, I think it's actually going to be an opportunity, not just for Alaska, but for America, when you look at what we need to do when we get through this pandemic. One of the things that we need to do as a nation, as a state, is become much more self-sufficient with regard to manufacturing, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's medical equipment. I think this pandemic has shown a real vulnerability in the supply chains that we should not be vulnerable again. So I think that's going to be a good opportunity for Alaska small businesses, for bigger businesses, for manufacturing, whether it's in the valley or all over the state. We are still, by the way, when we look at opportunities for our state, we're still going to be significantly building up our military and our Coast Guard. We've had almost $1.5 billion in the last 3 years in military construction in our state. That's going to continue. That's going to be a great opportunity. And, because of the resiliency of our small businesses, this is a very tough time. We're trying to get through it with a lot of resources, but our economy nationally was very strong before this pandemic, and our Alaska economy was finally coming out of its recession, strengthening by the day, and I think that that's important in terms of the opportunities we're going to have when we get out. But it's going to be a challenge, but with leaders like you, we'll get there.
All right, thank you, Senators. And this is just a reminder again, if you want to ask a question of the Senators but haven't had a chance to, please press *3 to be placed into the queue. Again, that's *3 to be placed into the queue. Next up, we're going to go to Gavin Hudson in Metlakatla. Gavin, you're on live with Senator Sullivan and Senator Murkowski.
Thank you. I have one different question for each senator. I listened on your last virtual town hall and was very encouraged to hear of how the Paycheck Protection Program might apply to Alaskans, and you folks were strongly encouraging every business in Alaska to apply to it because it could eventually become a grant program, and that's encouraging. However, the Small Business Administration posted rules last week that essentially eliminates gambling enterprises. And those regulations that the SBA issued say that if the purpose of the business is gambling, such as pari-mutuel, betting, racetrack, or gambling casino, the business is not eligible regardless of the percentage of gross revenue derived from gambling. And so, Senator Sullivan, I'd like to know if, as you know, Metlakatla has a Class 2 gaming operation, and so this is a big concern for us. So I'd like to know, Senator Sullivan, if that is a bureaucratic snafu, as you put it. That's my first question. And my second question is for Senator Murkowski. Every Alaskan knows that the value of putting cash directly into the hands of its citizens. And so I'd like to know if you support Senator Sanders' proposals to issue $2,000 monthly payments to every American, regardless of their income. I think that'll be the economic engine that really would be a game changer for America and for Alaskans in particular, especially given the fact that the oil prices are dropping, which means the state of Alaska isn't going to get permanent fund dividends potentially. It's going to hurt the budget. There's probably going to be even more cutbacks in the age of dramatic cutbacks. Tourism industry has evaporated overnight, and now the fishing industry is deeply in question too. And so in Metlakatla's case, with no casino, no tourism, and no fishing, the surest, fastest, best way to do this would be a permanent fund dividend style monthly payment of $2,000 per person. Thank you for your time.
So Gavin, let me get to the first question. That's why these town halls are so important. We will, my office will double check. Gambling, I was recently informed that the SBA regs did come out and say that. I just don't know if it's exactly going to cover what you have in Metlakatla. So let us work with you on that. It might, and you know, as you mentioned, that could be a challenge, or it might not. But let my office work with you on the extent to which that SBA reg fully or partially or doesn't disqualify the kind of enterprise that you're talking about in Metlakatla.
And Gavin, to the question about whether or not I would support something that would allow for, as Senator Sanders has proposed, $2,000 monthly to every American. These are challenging times, absolutely, without a doubt. And they have come upon us all so quickly that the most well-prepared individual could not have anticipated that they would see the economic impact on such a broad and global scale. So this is not a situation where you failed to save appropriately. This is not a situation where you didn't run your business appropriately. This is again unprecedented on so many different levels. And so one of the underpinnings, the cornerstone, if you will, of the CARES Act was to make sure that there was directed assistance quickly. And I was going to say immediately, but we all know that it is hard to get things immediately through the federal government. But getting basically a base minimum to individuals, families with children as quickly as we can was going to be important. But it was recognized that it's more than just that a check, that there are other ways that we can provide for direct assistance. And certainly the expanded unemployment insurance, $600 a week additional on top of the existing state benefits, and for a period of 4 months. So giving that direct assistance by way of unemployment insurance for those who are who have incurred student loan debt. We know that for so many young people, the burden of that monthly payment is hard in any circumstance. And so immediately, without any action by the student borrower, those payments are deferred, the interest is withheld, and so that is also immediate relief. We haven't talked about it, but for those in Southeast, our coastal communities and the Aleutians and Southwest, our fisheries are significant economic engines, and we work to include fisheries assistance, again, grants to those who have been impacted because the market has been decimated. People aren't eating out. The market for purchase is just not there. So those also are benefits that will be made available to those impacted, as well as what we've talked about with the small business loans and the PPP program, much of that being made available as a grant, not a loan, but as a grant to help deal with payroll and just those initial operating costs. So do I think that it is fair for us to evaluate what we have put in place to provide for that direct assistance to those who have been economically harmed? Yes, I think that is fair. I'm not prepared, though, to set up something that would give an automatic monthly payment to every American. I recognize that there are some who have been impacted in a very harsh and very directed way, and others for whom they still have their job. It may look a little bit different, but their financial situation might be different than the individual who lost their job, or the individual who put a lifetime into their small business to have it shuttered perhaps indefinitely. So I think we need to look critically at the programs we've put in place. We need to evaluate where we have shortchanged the programs or underestimated the need. We will continue to do that, and we'll continue to do that with all Alaskans and all Americans in mind.
Okay, thank you, Senators. Next, we're going to go to Jim Rowe up in Nome. Jim, you're on live with the Senators.
Yeah, good afternoon, Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan. Jim Rowe, I'm the owner, president of Bering Air up in Nome. I know you're both real familiar with Bering Air. We provide scheduled mail freight service from basically the Yukon Delta all the way to Point Hope. We're the largest non-government, non-school employer in Northwest Alaska. We have 150 employees. Right now, we've retained all of those employees. We basically have to continue to operate because the 30 village destinations and whatnot we serve have no other option right now. Our last competitor stopped operations last week. We've been the sole provider of medevacs in that region for almost 40 years. And so on that note, we have to continue to operate. Without us at this point, the villages would be totally isolated. So there's not really so much a question. I will throw out there that we have applied for the payroll protection and the CARES aviation-specific program with no results on either program yet. We did get a notification on the payroll protection from the bank that it was approved, and they were waiting on the SBA with no further response to that on that program. And we did do the CARES program for the one through September 30th for the aviation industry with no response other than they received our application. So having said that, I'm actually wanting to say we want to participate in helping beyond what we're already doing with providing ongoing mail freight, medevac services, and whatnot. We're in a situation here that if we have anybody within the company test positive, we could end up having to quarantine or take a good portion of the of our employee group out of the picture. We've kind of divided the company into two halves of pilots, mechanics, and cargo people, so that if we had somebody test positive and we lost the first half of them being quarantined, we would have a second wave of people who could continue to operate the flights on the limited schedule we have. But what I would like to do, I would like to buy 2 of the Abbott's machines and about 5,000 of the test kits as a private company, and either in conjunction with the Manalik and Norton Sound Health Corporation, conduct tests on all of our employees. And if the hospitals, we've talked to them already, if they weren't up to staff to where we needed, they could provide somebody to do that, we would get somebody trained to take these tests. And after we've tested all of our employees and their families and whatnot, I would make all the rest of the test kits available to the community. Right now, Nome and Kotzebue and Unalakleet and the areas we serve have no known cases, but there's been very little testing. And if we could pretty much verify that we don't have it in our region, the city of Nome and Kotzebue have pretty much closed their doors to the outside world, we may actually be able to be an area that doesn't end up with a significant amount of this disease. So we would like to do that, and the other underlying issue with that is that since we do provide medevac services and our airplanes are going back and forth to Anchorage, currently neither our pilots or the medics that operate these flights for Norton Sound Hospital have been tested, and the hospital won't test anybody unless you've got symptoms. I want to be able to test our flight crews and the people providing the medevacs and the people going to the villages with frequent tests, maybe as frequent as once or twice a week, to verify that, and maybe our medevac pilots that go to and from Anchorage get tested every time they come back from Anchorage. So what I'm asking here is some help acquiring. I'm more than willing to pay for them and bear the costs and whatnot, but I need some political help to help us acquire a couple of these machines in the tests. I do watch the president's briefings, and I've been interested in the last couple of days where Dr. Birx has said there's 18,000 of these machines scattered around the country with 1 million test kits, and they're getting none of them back. We'll put them to work if you can get us a couple of them. That's it.
Jim, thank you. Thank you on a lot of different levels. Thank you for the service that you provide up there and have for so long. You know, when you think about essential services, essential businesses, it's folks like you that are providing the mail. When you're bringing the mail, you're bringing pharmaceutical medication to people out in the villages, the medevacs that you do. Just a big thank you to you and your team out there. I'm glad to hear that you got some positive news from the SBA on your PPP application. Know that the delegation signed off, I think it was today, it might have been yesterday, but a letter in support of all of our smaller, more regional carriers for your application to that aviation program. This was something that was very important to us when the CARES Act was coming together, to make sure that this was not going to be support just for the big legacy air carriers, you know, that operate down in the lower 48, but that our smaller, more regional carriers would be able to have this level of assistance as well. So we want to help you with that. As you've been talking, you should see my kitchen table here. I can't see the table because I have paperwork scattered all over, and somewhere in this stack I have the list that tells me where some of these Abbott machines have gone out to in this state in this past week, because they are getting out. They are being distributed. ANTHC has been working aggressively to make these connections. The governor and his team have been working aggressively, and then, as you mentioned, the news in the White House task force in terms of what they've been pushing out. To reiterate what Senator Sullivan said in his introduction, the focus on where we are with testing right now is really where there's a great deal of energy, not only by the folks in the White House with the task force, but so many of us who recognize that it's going to be just exactly this type of testing that you're talking about that's going to allow people to get back to work and do so safely. And the diagnostic test is one thing, but as you mentioned, it's these rapid tests that can determine whether or not you have been exposed, whether you have developed any level of immunity here, but again, making sure that you're able to do testing on a frequent basis. So it's got to be ease of testing, and it has to be results that are immediate. That's what these tests that are coming around are. And again, what we heard from Dr. Hahn at the FDA was with regards to these rapid antibody tests, he said that they're nearing completion of assessment and validation, hope to receive OKs in a week. And then he says, we need to flood the zone with them. He said, we want to have the capacity to do 10 million in a week. That doesn't necessarily help you in your question about how do I get these. I think that this is something that we're all trying to coordinate, again, with the state and with FEMA Region 10. But knowing your interest here and what you're looking for, we can try to plug you into some of these discussions as well in terms of how we can gain access out in different regions.
So, Jim, I want to just thank you as well. Retaining your 150 employees during this difficult time is not only critical for the region, it's really critical for the state. And you've got a great airline there, and we have a letter, as Senator Murkowski mentioned already, for a bunch of our regional airlines to try to get the Treasury to make sure they're paying attention to us. We talked a lot about that as this bill was being written. The test issue, the state actually is, we have about 100 of these Abbott machines, which is pretty good relative to a lot of other states. The state and the tribal health organizations are prioritizing them. Communities that are off the road system, communities that are 100 miles away from another testing system, and, as you mentioned, industry concerns too. So I believe that Norton Sound Health Corporation is either getting some or should have received some of these tests from either the state or ANTHC. The issue, though, right now is I believe most of the testing is currently for people who are showing symptoms, not preventative. But the more we get out there, the more we get to the state, the more that we can turn from people with symptoms, who are going to be a priority, to workers like yours who are also a priority in providing essential services to our state. So we're pulling every lever, including with the federal government, with these companies themselves, to get these tests to Alaska. It's really going to be critical, not just for our state, but for our country's return to an open society and working. But, we want to make sure your airline's doing well and keeping your employees on the payroll. So thanks again for that. And if you have follow-up questions with me or my team, please follow up with us.
All right, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Karen Hess in Haines. Karen, you're on live with the Senators.
Good evening. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. It's almost time is up. Thank you, Senators, for your service to our country and to Alaska. I had two questions, but since we're running short of time, I will only give you one. Our community was planning some infrastructure improvements based on their projected revenue. Is there any loans going to be available possibly for communities to maybe take advantage of for any infrastructure improvements, because now they're not going to have the revenue that they were projecting because sales tax is going to be down. Cruise industry is not looking good. We're told now that maybe July, first part of July, but at that point, even if they are allowed to come, we don't know if there's going to be anybody wanting to cruise. So I'll just go with that question.
Well, Karen, on the issue of lost revenue, this is something that we have been seeking clarification from the Secretary of Treasury for a week or so. When we were moving towards passage of the CARES Act, when I asked the question about making sure that that local governments who have lost revenue as a result of impact from the coronavirus, that they would be able to gain reimbursement for that through the State Stabilization Fund. This is a $1.25 billion fund, revenue or resources that will be coming to the state as part of the CARES Act. And the criteria for use of those funds are they have to be related to COVID-19, and they have to be for matters that were not already included in a previously passed budget. So if these infrastructure that you're talking about are things that you have already budgeted for, there's probably some question as to whether or not it would qualify under the terms of the legislation as we have passed it. But again, we're seeking to get greater definition from the Secretary as to the allowance of these expenditures, because this will be significant for our communities. As you point out, Haines relies on tourism revenue. So many communities in our state during the summertime, it's the bed tax revenues that they receive. It's the cruise head tax, and if you don't have the ships coming in, you don't have that tax coming to your community. If you don't have the tourists coming in, you don't have the revenues through that bed tax. And so making sure that, in fact, Treasury allows for this level of flexibility as we believe that was intended under the law is what we are seeking clarification on. But that might be some help for Haines here. But again, I want to make sure that we're in the clear on that, because you don't want to be in a situation where you've made the assumption that you're going to be able to gain access to these state stabilization funds as part of reimbursed expenditure, only to find out that in fact that is not the case. That puts people and puts our communities, our local governments in a really tough bind. So we're seeking clarification on that.
And Karen, you're talking about, and Senator Murkowski, you're talking about the CARES Act, which we've been referring to as phase 3 of the different legislation. A number of us have been also talking about phase 4, and I think phase 4 should be legislation that is centered on infrastructure. As a matter of fact, the whole idea is we get through this period, which is more like a tourniquet for our country to get through and cushion this unprecedented, blow to America, to Alaska, kind of like a giant natural disaster or even a war that has hit us from overseas. But phase 4, in my view, should be focused on really turbocharging our state and nation's economy. And I think the way we should be doing that is with a significant infrastructure package. I was on a meeting today with a bunch of my Senate colleagues on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and there was near unanimous consent that we need to move a highway bill, which we've already passed out of committee, that's major infrastructure, and pair that with what's called the WRDA bill, which is really about ports, harbors, bridges. The president has backed this. I've talked to him a couple times about it just in the last 10 days. So it's not immediate, but I do think a strong kind of policy move for Alaska and America as we're getting out of this to turbocharge our economy will be infrastructure, and hopefully that can impact Haines and other communities across our state.
All right, thank you, Senators. We're going to try and squeeze one more question in here. We have Sean and Juneau who's got a question for the Senators. Sean, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to thank both of the senators. I want to say a big thank you to the senators' staffs. It is the staff of our elected officials that are the unsung heroes of our government. They help keep the democracy working. I want to say that I'm heartened by a lot of what I've heard tonight, especially the fact that there's going to be likely progress on an infrastructure bill. But I want to say that I have great concerns about oversight for the most recent stimulus package because it looks like the president is trying to defeat oversight, which helps no one but him. I believe that one way that can be countered, and this is more of a comment than a question, one way that can be countered is if we support some form of some modification of Sanders' proposal, which would be money directly to the people, because then there's very little oversight required, and it goes to the people who are the engine of our democracy. And there's no doubt that effectively our entire economy, the world's economy, Alaska's economy, is going to be different once this has cleared. And it's going to be different until it clears as well. So this is an opportunity, and the way I see we getting ahead of this is if Americans have cash on hand. That's why I support this kind of bill. Not so much that it's socialism, but more because it helps the people who are the best choices themselves for what they see for their lives.
So, Sean, thank you first for acknowledging the staff. And I think Senator Sullivan and I would join you in a hearty round of applause. We're the voices on the line, but we have had our teams working around the clock, not only our folks back in D.C., but the folks up in Alaska, and they're doing an exceptional job. So thank you for recognizing them. In terms of the oversight, I know that the president's actions with regard to the IG that had been named moved aside, I know that has caused concern. Believe me, there must be oversight that is exercised. We have directed a lot money. When you're talking about a $2 trillion plus measure, and that's just the CARES Act. But in addition to what has come previous to CARES and what will probably come after the CARES Act, we owe a level of accountability and responsibility towards stewardship of the taxpayer dollars. I have said that yes, this is a lot of money going out the door, but failure to act is not a responsible course. What is happening to our economy right now is a direct result of the government letting us know that in an effort to save lives, to protect citizens from this virus, from this invisible enemy, we have to do certain things that are harming our economy. And so the government coming in and allowing for providing for that level of relief is not only important, it's critical. So how we get it out to people, how we get it out to those who are our small businessmen and women is important. But I think also we need to recognize that there are infrastructure, there are aspects of what we all desire that government has an appropriate role to provide for that level of funding. So whether it is public safety, whether it's transportation, education, we know that we need to ensure that those levels of government support are there. But we do it with accountability and oversight.
And Sean, I just want to say thanks also. You're spot on full-blown oversight for this program, 100%. We'll do it in the Congress. As a matter of fact, a number of us wanted those transparency provisions in the bill that are in there. And then your comment on the staffs, I agree 100%. You know, in these time of very significant national emergencies, health emergencies, jobs, economy, there was a 96-0 agreement in the Senate on the CARES Act, which is pretty remarkable. And as we've talked about, that does have direct payments to individuals, to families, to small businesses, and even big businesses. But the key there is all of this legislation focuses primarily on making sure the employers stay connected with their employees, which is going to help us get out of this in terms of our economic recovery a lot more quickly, and it just makes sense to keep that connection. So that's a huge part of this legislation, whether on the Paycheck protection side or on the businesses over 500. And I do think that the agreement in the Senate, unanimous, was pretty important on this issue of direct payments through this time of unprecedented challenge.
All right, thank you, Senators. We're just about out of time, but I wanted to give you both the opportunity to just have some final closing remarks before we sign off tonight. So, Senator Murkowski, I'll have you start.
Well, thank you, and thank you to Alaskans who are on the line, who stayed with us, who have weighed in, whether on this teletown hall or with your emails, your calls. While we may not be in our offices, we're working, and we're working for you. And so how we're able to remain connected, I think, is so important. I do know that there will be an opportunity for you to stay on the line and leave a message here after this. But also, please know that we try to keep current information on our websites. My website, murkowski.senate.gov. We've also got we've got a web page that's dedicated specifically to COVID-19 with resources. We've also included a feature that speaks to frequently asked questions. So perhaps if you had a question tonight that you didn't get answered, it might actually be there on the website. So what we're trying to do is understand fully how Alaskans are being impacted, be able to respond as readily as we can, but know that these are efforts that we are all making together. These are sacrifices that we are all making together, and together we will get on the other side of this. Alaskans are strong. We are being mightily tested right now, mightily tested. But I believe that working together, showing kindness to one another, and appreciating where each of us are throughout this process is going to be important. So just thank you for allowing us to be of aid and assistance, and we will keep connected. But until then, please be well.
And I just want to thank everybody, but also wish everybody a blessed Easter, happy Easter, Passover, as we coming at the end of Holy Week here. And God bless everybody. You know, this is a challenging time. There's a lot of frustration. We have these programs that we're trying to get out the door. We're frustrated too with regard to wanting to help every one of our fellow citizens. But when the federal government does push these kind of massive resources out the door, it's well-intentioned, certainly, but it's not always efficient. So please continue to use us. We're here 24/7. As Sean mentioned earlier, the staffs are working around the clock. Senator Murkowski's, mine, Congressman Young's. But that's our job, especially now. That's our job, especially now. So please continue to reach out, use us. We will try to get answers. We will try to get resources. We'll try to get individual cases resolved that get us through this challenging time more stronger and more resilient. God bless.